Thank you.
Okay, so just a little bit about what this class is and what this class isn't, because I think it's just important to set a little bit of a framework of what we're doing. We are exploring Yalta, which, as some people have responded to my email, they thought I was lecturing about World War II, which I will not. That could be a separate class Gideon will teach. I do not know much about history. I will be talking about Yalta in the Gemara. Yalta is the wife of Rabbi Nachman, the daughter of the Reish Galuta, the exilarch, the prominent figure in the exile. And we don't often get complete pictures or portrayals of women in Jewish text. We get stories and snippets here and there about something they've done or a story concerning them, but we don't really get a full picture. So the goal of tonight is to kind of create a bigger picture of who this woman was, what does she believe in? We're going to learn a little bit about her background, and we're really going to see her in action and kind of build this picture of who she was. What this class is also not, it's very easy to get bogged down in Gemara. Especially in a class where we have 40 minutes and we're going to go through 4 Gemaras. So we're not going to get stuck in kind of the lamdas. We're not going to get stuck in the learning of it. We're going to really focus on the story. And also the other thing we're not going to do is we are not going to let some of the kind of difficult topics, but specifically the difficult gender-related topics, we're not going to let that veer us off into a completely separate conversation. Could be a separate share for another time. But this is not about Yalta and gender in the Gemara. That could be, part of the summation at the end. Certainly, it's part of her identity. Obviously, she is a woman in the Gemara, but we are not going to get bogged down in that. So with that, I want to start with a Gemara from Masachet Beitza. And the way I'm just going to do this is I'm going to read through the Gemara, set a bit of a framework, and then open it up for questions and thoughts, and then we're going to move on. So we are on source number 1 right here. Shachta basadeh. Shachta basadeh lo yaviana bamot. If someone slaughters an animal out in the field, this is talking about on a chag, on a holiday, they are not allowed to bring the animal back to their house on a pole. Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis learn in a Braita, Ein hasome yotze b'maklo, v'ein haroeh b'tarmilo. A blind person doesn't go out with their cane, and a shepherd doesn't go out without their bag. V'ein yotzin bakise, and someone doesn't go outside being carried on a chair by other people. Echad ha'ish ve'echad ha'isha. This is true for both men and women. Eini, is this so? V'ha shalach Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, zaken echad haya b'shchunatenu, v'haya yotze beglod kishalo. So they're saying, is this true? Well, didn't Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi say that there was once an old man in the neighborhood, and he would go out on a chag in his glodki? So I put a picture of a glodki. That's what this photo is right here. Didn't he go out in this thing? Which means he was being carried. So how is it possible that he was being carried on Yantif? Ubau v'shalu shalu et Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. So they came and they asked Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. The Amar, and he responded to them, Im rabin tzrichin lo mutar. So if a lot of people need someone, they're allowed to be carried in this sort of chair with poles. So we're going to jump down a few lines in the Gemara. That's what the ellipses is for. Amar lo Rabbi Nachman lechama bar Ada shaliach Tzion. So Rabbi Nachman says to Chama bar Ada, who used to go regularly back and forth from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, he says, Ki salkata lahatam, when you go there, akif v'zil asum la detzur, go in a roundabout way and go to the ladder of Tyre. V'zil lagabe de Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, go talk to Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi. Ubai mine kise ma'atan ba, and ask him, can you be carried on a chair with poles? Ad adil lahatam, once he got there, nach nafshe de Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi. By the time he got there, Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi had died, so he isn't able to ask him this question. Ki salik ashkechei Rabbi Zerika, but when he gets back, he asks Rabbi Zerika, Amar le, kisei ma'atonde, and he says, what's the deal with this chair? What is the ruling? Are you allowed to carry someone on this glodki, on this chair with poles? Amar le, hachi amar Rab Ami, he says, this is what Rab Ami says, ubilvad shaloi kataf. He says, you are allowed to be carried on this chair as long as you're not carried on the shoulders. So those poles that you see in this picture, you have to carry them like this man is in his hands, not up on the shoulders. And then the Gemara says, "Umay bilvad sheloi katef." What does it mean that it can't be up on his shoulders? Amar Rav Yosef Baria de Rabba ba'alomki. What it means that it can't be carried on the shoulders is that it has to be carried in their hands, and it would be carried a little bit lower down, so it's less noticeable. And then the Gemara asks, Aini, well, is that so? The Harav Nachman Shar Yalta Alonki. But isn't it true that Rabbi Nachman let his wife Yalta go out on a chag in a chair on these poles that rested on the shoulders? We just learned that someone can't be carried on the shoulders, but Rabbi Nachman let his wife do it. And the Gemara answers, Shani Yalta Debaitai. Yalta is different because she was afraid. She was afraid of, so Amemar Marzutra, they're going to answer, what does that mean that she was afraid? Nichtafelehu b'shabta deragla mishum biatuta. They also would be carried to places on Yontif, on people's shoulders because they were afraid. But Amri le mishum duchka detibura. What they were afraid of was that there was going to be a lot of pushing in the streets and that they would be less secure in people's hands. They would be more secure on people's shoulders, and therefore they were allowed to be carried that way. So our introduction to Yalta is a bit of an odd one, right? There are some assumptions that are made. We know that we are told that she's Rabbi Nachman's wife. She is allowed to be carried. We don't know exactly why she's carried. We know she's just afraid. That's why she's carried in one way, but why is she going out in this way at all? And that we are going to learn from the Tosfot, which is the next source. Why is Yalta being carried at all? Okay. Shani Yalta de Baina. So this is the line from the Gemara that's going to be explained. Ve'im tomar v'halo hitiru ela ki yesh batzorech rabim. If you were going to say that Yalta being carried was allowed only because there was this public need for her, ke'adamrin la ayil, because it says there, v'yesh lamar dil manami halacha l'tzorech rabim. So if you wanted to say that it's not okay that she would be carried except for when a number of people need her, obviously, if it's being permitted, like the other rabbis who were needed, Amemar and Marzutra, these are rabbis that people had to consult with, seek advice from, ask halachic questions to, they were able to be carried in that way because there was a tzorech rabim. There was a public need for them. And so Tosfot is saying there actually was a public need for Yalta as well. And the Tosfot explains why that is. Shebat Reish Hagolah Haita. She is the daughter of the exilarch, of the Reish Galuta. V'hayu Rabim Tzrichim Mimana. And people needed to ask advice from her. So we learn another important detail about Yalta. We first learned in the Gemara she is the wife of Rabbi Nachman, which makes her a somewhat prominent figure. But we also learn that she is the daughter of the Reish Galuta, this big figure in the community, the exilarch. He's not necessarily a religious figure, but he is a very important figure. And because she's his daughter, people sought out her advice. And she became a public need the same way the rabbis were a public need. So I'm just going to unmute everyone now. I don't know why it's saying ask to oh wait, hold on, sorry. Rabbi Belowski, I want to ask you how to unmute everyone at the same time, but I can't.
You actually no longer can do that. You have to just allow people to unmute, and if they wish to speak, they will selectively unmute themselves.
Interesting. Do I have to press ask to unmute everyone?
Yes, press to ask to unmute everyone, and that will allow those who wish to speak to press unmute and speak if they speak. Could someone else speak to verify this?
Can anyone unmute themselves?
Hey.
Oh, amazing. Okay, so I want to pause here and ask just what are people's initial thoughts on Yalta? We know she is the daughter of a prominent figure, the wife of a prominent figure, and people seek advice from her. Any thoughts, questions, comments?
Well, the fact that she's even mentioned in the Gemara is quite a big deal, I think, because not many women were mentioned by name.
Yeah, I can't see who's talking, but it sounds like Eve.
Annabelle.
Annabelle, you sound like Eve.
Hi.
Annabelle, yes. The fact that she is mentioned is a very big deal. There are not many women who are mentioned in the Gemara. We know Bruria, we know Rabbi Akiva's wife Rachel. Yeah, it is pretty rare for a woman to be mentioned. And also, I think to be mentioned in a way that puts her kind of on par with these other very influential and important figures is certainly not something that we see very often.
But she seems a bit delicate.
Okay, can you say more about that?
Well, she just reminds me of Rabban Gamliel. So there's a series of Mishnayot about stuff that Rabban Gamliel used to do that other people weren't allowed to do, and at a certain point that other people weren't allowed to do. And at a certain point, and he's of course from the house of the leader of the community. I mean, he's like a bit, and at a certain point he says, well, I'm delicate. It's like, you know, okay, normal things don't apply to me. And there's a tiny sense, I don't know, I get a tiny sense here.
Okay, I love that you're saying that. It could seem like Ula's delicate. I mean, not Ula, sorry, like Yalta's delicate, right? Maybe a little high maintenance. She needs to be carried places. I don't know if she's afraid of crowd control, just like the other rabbis were, and that's why she had to be up on people's shoulders. But certainly she isn't just walking to a Beit Midrash or to wherever it is that people are seeking advice. Maybe she's a little high maintenance and has to be carried. The word delicate, Benedict, hold on to that, because in our next source, we're going to look at a completely different perspective, and I want to know if you still feel she's delicate after it, okay?
Ramie, do you think there might be an element of gender stereotyping here? I know you said you're not going to talk about gender. Well, the fact that she's a woman and there are not many women who are prominent in the Gemara, and there's the implication or the assumption that because she's a woman, she's more physically afraid.
Okay, interesting. It does say that Amemar and Mar Zutra were afraid, and so we are inferring from Amemar and Mar Zutra that she might have been afraid also. Right. I'm meaning afraid of the crowd control. She obviously was uncomfortable with something, but the crowd control specifically we learned from Amemar and Mar Zutra. So because she's the only woman, there's no way to like generalize about other women and if they were afraid or if it's just a Yalta thing, but certainly we see that Amemar and Mar Zutra feel the same way. So I don't know. Okay. I don't know how gendered it is yet.
What is it that she was needed for? I mean,
advice.
Advice on what? On what? So which way did she?
We're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. The other rabbis are getting carried to a Beit Midrash. It doesn't say where she's getting carried to. It just says that that she's getting carried and that people are seeking out advice from her. And also, we don't really know what advice means, right? When Amemar and Mar Zutra and any rabbi gets carried to a Beit Midrash, we kind of understand what kind of psak and, you know, rabbinic advice they are giving. But because there is no model for what Yalta is doing, it's kind of hard to understand what it means that she's giving advice. Definitely. Ruth, did you want to say something?
I was going to ask what sort of advice she was going to give.
Okay, so
I don't know how many women we read about who give advice.
Exactly. There are not many women we read about in the Gemara who are giving advice. Okay, we're going to jump to the next Gemara. All of these things Benedict, hold on to the delicate thing. Ruth, hold on to the giving advice thing. We're gonna keep building on this picture of Yalta. Okay, we are on the third source. I'm gonna just move everyone over a bit. Okay. We are now inside of Rabbi Nachman and Yalta's house. Ula, Ikla Lebe Rabbi Nachman. Ula came to visit the house of Rabbi Nachman. Karich Rivta Barich Birkat Mazon. They ate bread. They benched. Yahavle Kose de Birchatal Rabbi Nachman. So they ate, they benched, and afterward, Ula gives the cup to bless after Birkat Hamazon to Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman says in return to him, Amar le Rabbi Nachman, li shader mar kose de birchatal Yalta. He says, pass the cup of benediction to Yalta. Amar le, so Ula says, Hachi amar Rabbi Yochanan. He cites the word of Rabbi Yochanan. Ein pri bitna shel isha mitbarach mi pri bitno shel ish. He said, isn't it so? Don't we learn from Rabbi Yochanan that the fruit of a woman's stomach, womb, is actually blessed through the fruit of a man's stomach? And he cites Sefer Dvarim, where it says, Ubarach pri bitnecha. It says, the fruit of his stomach shall be blessed. Pri bitna lo ne'emar. It doesn't say it in the feminine. Ella pri bitnecha. It says it in the masculine. So it must mean that they're referring to a man's stomach. And then they're having this conversation about the fruit of whose body is blessed through whose body. Tanya Nanyahachi says, isn't it also taught in a Braita in another place? Rabbi Natan Omer, and now he's saying it in the name of Rabbi Natan. Minayin she'ein pri bitna shel isha mitbarach, ela mi pri bitno shel ish. From where do we know that the fruit of a woman's stomach is only blessed through the fruit of a man's stomach? And then he cites the same source, Shenemar, citing the pasuk in Sefer Dvarim, Ubarach pri bitnacha. The fruit of his stomach will be blessed. Pri bitna lo ne'emra. It doesn't say her stomach, ela pri bitnacha. It says his stomach. So he's going on and saying, look at all these places where it says this. Isn't it enough for you to bless the cup? She will be blessed through you. That's what he's saying. Adahachi shama Yalta. Meanwhile, Yalta is overhearing this conversation. Kama bezihara, she gets up quickly, ve'alta levei and she goes into the wine cellar. V'tavra arba me'adinei chamar. She gets up, she goes to the wine cellar, and she bashes 400 barrels of wine. So Benedict, this is where I'm going to ask you if you still think she's delicate. Keep it in the front of your mind now. Is she delicate? So she breaks these things of wine. Amar le Rav Nachman. Rabbi Nachman gets back involved, and he says, Yishtar lamar kisei achrina. Give her another cup of benediction. Just pass her the cup. Shlach le. So Ula sends it to her, and he says to her, Kol hai nivga de birchatahi. He hands her this cup of wine, and he says, all of this wine is wine of blessing. So therefore, it doesn't really matter what you drink from. All of this is blessed wine. Shal chale, and she responds to him, mime hadure mile umis martute kalme. So she has this kind of charif, really harsh response that she sends back to him. She says the meaningless words come from itinerant peddlers, and this is a direct kind of burn at him because he traveled regularly from Eretz Yisrael to Babel. And she says, from rags come lice. So he's trying to kind of make up for it by giving her a new cup of wine and saying, don't worry, you know, this wine is also blessed. And she has this really harsh response for him. And she does not seem to buy the second round of the attempt at passing the Kos bracha. So here's another place we're going to pause. I want to ask a few questions, and then I want to hear your thoughts on it. Yalta clearly does not like being talked about while she's in the room. We see that just again, from the context of the story, they're in the home of Rabbi Nachman. It's clearly the practice in this home that Yalta is allowed to be passed this cup. Ula maybe has never seen this practice be done before. Maybe he doesn't believe in it. Ula is not comfortable passing it. He brings all these textual supports to prove why he's right. Yalta gets really upset that she's not involved in the conversation. She gets up, she goes and breaks all of this wine. And then there's an attempt to kind of remedy the situation. But it seems from at least Yalta's perspective that she is so upset that she's not really willing to move past it with Ula. So I want to ask, why doesn't Yalta let him make the situation better? And also, Benedict, do you still think that she's delicate?
Well, in this sugya, she's clearly pushing back very hard.
Mm-hmm. So maybe she's too far the opposite of delicate.
No, I didn't say that, but I'm just saying in this sugya, she's clearly pushing back very hard.
She's pushing back very hard. And how does that make you think about her in the first context?
I can't. I mean, I really don't understand the first sugya. I think she's being quite subtle here, and this is not my insight. This is Gila Fine's, but it's as if she's saying to Ulla, "Look, you think I'm just a vessel to be impregnated, but if you don't think vessels are important, go and have a look in this cellar. What use is that wine without the vessel?"
Interesting. So it's interesting you're saying that. Is that Gila's take on it?
That's Gila's take on it, yes.
So there is some interesting kind of feminist commentary on this. I've seen one that says that that Yalta was, well, I think I'm going to get into it in a little bit. I don't want to focus too much on it right now. I'm going to get to the feminist commentary in a bit, because it's not just on this Gemara. Also on the next Gemara, we're going to see there's a similar feminist commentary that talks about how Yalta's actions are reflective of a bigger attitude towards women. Obviously it's a very legitimate read. I happen to not agree with it, and I'll explain it more in the next sugya. First of all, I think like it takes some context, some feminist context, to be able to like have these kind of thoughts. And I don't know that she existed in a world like that, where maybe she felt that way, but there clearly wasn't like a context for her to express it in or have learned it in. I think her being the daughter of an exilarch, I don't think it's a coincidence that she demands a certain level of respect, having grown up in that role. And I mean, I like to compare her to a Disney princess, which I'll explain why I mean that. Sometimes we can look at Disney movies and say these are delicate princesses who end up in a certain situation and things kind of happen to them. And they're victims of their circumstance, but I don't think it's ever a coincidence that these girls are princesses, because it means that they grew up in a house where they had some amount of power, where they were sitting at a table with powerful people. They were probably entitled to a much better education. And I think Yalta falls into this category as well. Yalta, we can look at her and say, look at this woman who is married to a rabbi, and maybe that's where she's finding her voice. But I think that the fact that she is the Reish Galuta's daughter actually is very big in shaping who she is. and how she goes about certain things. So we could see that from the first Gemara. She feels like she needs to be carried somewhere, or people think she needs to be somewhere to get advice. But certainly in the second Gemara, I think she's not used to being disrespected in any sort of way. A, because her father is important. B, because her husband is important. And C, because the education and the kind of social context that comes with that is something that's shaped who she is. She grew up sitting at a table, I'm sure, with very smart, very powerful people, was engaged in conversation, and now to be sitting in her own home and be talked about is not something that sits well with someone. I think, you know, just like the Disney princess kind of model, any non-royal or a different class of women might be used to being treated a certain way, but certainly I think her class has a lot to do with her actions and also the way she views herself. Any other thoughts before we move forward? Ruth, yeah.
From my pure ignorance, it strikes me that this is a very brave lady to go and break 400 bottles of wine. Glass in those days wasn't made in a factory in 5 minutes. Glass was a very precious, I mean, they had lots of glass, but it was precious. And to break 400 bottles is extreme.
Yeah, it is.
What point was she making?
So if we go to the next source.
You don't think she's just rather petulant and actually quite rude? This man is in her house. He may not be behaving the way that she chooses to, but actually he's still a guest in their house.
Yeah.
And she's behaving in a way which is possibly rather spoilt. You know, to go downstairs and break 400 bottles of wine, you know, is just, I mean, it's rather extreme response, don't you think?
So I totally agree. And I think talking about class and privilege is an important thing in that. She maybe doesn't have the same value of objects, of food, of wine, that she is willing to just go break all of these things and cause a massive expense because she's upset.
Yeah, but that's rather childish.
It's a very extreme thing for her to do.
But it's also rather childish too.
Yeah, so I wanna, that's like one of the qualities of her that we're gonna kind of include in the overall picture. Is she justified in what she does? Is she childish, or is the point that she's making so big and so profound that this is what she had to do in order to achieve it? Or was she wrong? Like, is this the wrong way? You know, is this the wrong way to go about getting someone to listen to you or to respect you? Because at the end of the day, Ula passes her the cup. I think after her kind of her episode, or whatever we want to call this, I don't know that he was passing her the cup respectfully. I think he just knew he had to do it at that point. Okay, so the Maharsha.
Sorry, are you sure he passes her the cup? I thought he passes her a different cup.
Yeah, he ends up passing her a cup though.
But it's the koshel bracha from the. Yeah, okay, it's a different cup.
It's a different cup. It is a different cup, and he's trying to convince her that this cup is still, all wine is like, all of it's blessed. This is still a blessed cup. He's trying to convince her, don't think that there's anything less of this. She obviously isn't buying it. I don't know if she's just upset about the first part of the conversation, or if she thinks it's insulting to be handed the second cup instead of the first cup. But whatever it is, she doesn't want it, and Ula ends up passing it. And I don't know if Ula is only passing it because it's the second cup, or if because after what she just did, he feels like he has to just pass it. Okay, so we're going to read the Maharsha. Here you can see a bit of a bio right here. So the Maharsha teaches Kasa Yalta v'tirarba me'adine dechamra. So he says she was angry and broke 400 jars of wine. L'erot she'ein kasa bishvil kos yain shalosh lachle. She did this in order to prove that she wasn't actually upset about the wine that wasn't sent to her. It wasn't wine that was important to her. Eino nechshav b'nei al kos habracha shalosh lach la kasa. She wasn't upset because she wanted wine. She was upset because the kos bracha was not passed to her. So in order for her to, this is like a similar kind of model, but different takeaway from what Gila Fine said in Sue and Benedict. She wanted to prove that something wasn't important, but according to the Maharsha, what she is trying to prove is that wine is not important to her. She didn't want the kos shel bracha because of the wine, which, you could say like she was trying to show that her intentions were pure. Her intentions were specifically about the kos shel bracha. She didn't really care about the wine. Therefore, she goes and smashes all of these bottles, and to show that she doesn't care about wine, she really cares about the kos bracha. I think all of the things that were said still stand. Like, even if that is the case, does it mean that breaking all these things is, not childish? No, it doesn't mean that. Even if she's trying to prove she doesn't care about the wine, going and breaking 400 things, I mean, there's a lot of things we can say about it. One thing is that it obviously shows she doesn't really value money very much. Wine was clearly not cheap, and she's just destroying it to prove a point. But also, at least from a personal takeaway, I don't see her trying to interject in the conversation at all. She doesn't stop and say, excuse me, can you pass it? Rabbi Nachman doesn't say, you're in our home, this is our custom. There's kind of no conversation about what should actually happen. She just gets very upset at how he's lecturing them about the sources as to why the blessing of her womb should come through her husband, and that should be enough for her. And instead of kind of anyone trying to use their words to solve this, she gets up and she does something really drastic and breaks everything. Okay, so that is our second picture of Yalta. Our first picture is that she's someone who people seek advice from. Our second picture is that she is someone who acts in maybe a rash way. The word childish was used. The word feminist was used. There are a lot of different ways we can look at this. None of these are wrong. None of these are, 100%. We're all just building a picture. So I don't want to say no, this isn't right. No, this is right. We're all like, let's bring all of it into this kind of colorful picture of her that we're building. Any questions or thoughts before we add another stroke to this picture? Nope. Okay, great. So we are jumping down to source 5. Okay, and this is just a disclaimer here. This is one of the sources where I don't want to get bogged down in like the gender stuff of women and psak. There is a time and a place for these conversations. There is also a power in being able to examine a text, look at it, notice it, name it, take a breath, and move on. And that is what we are going to do here. We are going to power through it. Okay. Yalta aita de malakame de Rabbar Bar Chana. Yalta brought a stain, like she's during her observation of Nida. She has a question about one of the colors of her stain, whether she's ritually pure or ritually impure. She brings the blood before Rabba Bar Chana, Vitamile, and he deems her ritually impure. Hadar Aitalakame de Rabbi Yitzchak Barya de Rabbi Yehuda. So then she brings that same stain before Rabbi Yitzchak, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, Vidachile, and he deems her pure. What is the obvious problem that jumps out from the first line of the Gemara? Don't all jump out at once.
She's forum shopping.
Yes, exactly. it seems like she's psak shopping, right? She goes to one rabbi and says, am I ritually pure, ritually impure? He says ritually impure. Seems like she doesn't like the answer, and she goes to someone else and gets the answer she wants. Excellent. That is a very, very big problem. Okay, so we're gonna continue. V'hechi avi hachi, how could she do this? V'hatanya, don't we learn in a Braita? Chacham shetimei ein chavero rashai lahatir. Ein rashai lataher, asar ein chavero rashai lahatir. Don't we learn in a Braita that if one person paskins that something is ritually impure, his colleague is not allowed to then go say that it's ritually pure? And similarly, if someone said something is asur, if it's prohibited or ritually impure, his colleague is therefore not allowed to go ahead and make it pure. Interestingly, when we said she was shopping around for a psak, we were thinking about how we would say we personally are not allowed to go shop around for a psak. But actually what the Gemara is saying is that it's problematic for the person who's giving the psak to give a different psak than their colleague gave. So the isur here is not on the person who's asking the question necessarily, it's on the person who's giving the psak. How could this second psak be tahor? How could she be ritually pure when the first psak was that she is ritually impure? Great, okay. We are right here. Okay. Me'ikara tamuye haba mitamile. So initially, Rabbi Yitzchak deemed her impure. This is what the Gemara is saying. Originally, the second Rav, who actually then deems her tahor, initially he actually said she was ritually impure. Kevan de amar le, but then she said to him, de kol yoma de havi michtili ki hai gavna v'haidna dehu chash beina dachile. So he first said it was impure, and she says to him, every time I bring this kind of blood to Rabba Bar Chana, he says that this kind of blood is pure, but now dechash be'einea, he has some sort of pain or issue with his eye. He deemed it impure. So Yalta, she's not really shopping around for a psak. She's actually saying, I know personally that this color is ritually pure. I've brought it to Rabba Bar Chana many times before, and he's deemed it pure. This time when I brought it, he deemed it impure. And because I know he normally deems it pure, there's something wrong with his eye, I'm gonna get a second opinion. So this is one of those places where I wanted to talk, Benedict, also get back to that kind of feminist critique. There is a modern feminist critique that says that the chash be'einea, the issue with his eye is that he is unable to see the woman's experience. That is the problem in his eye. It's not a physical illness he has, but it's kind of like a bigger problem with his vision. So that is a modern feminist critique, and I personally think that critique kind of cheapens Yalta's experience, because if that's the case, then Yalta's not actually saying she knows about the color and challenging the psak, she's challenging the system. And I think that Yalta here is actually very sure about the halacha. To me, this Gemara is not at all about like an overall systemic issue with going to a Rav and asking him about colors. I think Yalta is very confident that she has gotten a certain psak before. She knows the halacha, and she wants to make sure that the right psak is being given. And her concern here is really for, it's not about like the broader system, but it's about this one specific case. So again, like there is a lot of, I think it's interesting, like another kind of feminist take on, like, I don't think we see very many feminist takes on the Gemara, but certainly in cases where women are involved in the stories, which are rare, we kind of jump to like insert the voice of feminist critique. I definitely understand and kind of hear where it's coming from. Here I prefer the Gemara without it, just because I think it kind of cheapens her halachic knowledge by saying that this is about something bigger and not actually about halacha. Okay, onward. So he has this problem with his eye, and therefore she goes and gets another psak. We're going to skip a few lines in the Gemara just because it gets into a little bit of a nitty-gritty about nida. But just to summarize those lines, the Gemara is discussing if a woman who had a stain and lost her garment goes to a rabbi describing the color, do we believe her? And the answer, right here, let me just highlight it for you. Here we go. The answer, umi mehimane, do we believe these claims? Yes, we believe these women who are coming and saying that they are describing their stains. Vahatanya, we learn in a Braita, ne'emenet isha lomar kazer ra'iti ve'ibadati. We believe a woman who says, I saw, this is what I saw, but I lost it. So this is one of the reasons we are believing Yalta when she says, you know, like, is it out of the blue that Yalta is saying, I saw this stain and I know it's kosher? It's based on these other stories of women who are known to be trustworthy about their stains. And we're skipping a few lines in the Gemara. Again, we are going down to Tashma right here. Tashma, come in here. De Yalta aite de malakame de Rabbi Bar Chana. Yalta brought the blood initially to Rabbi Bar Chana, the Tamile, and he deemed her ritually impure. Lakame de Rabbi Yitzchak Barya de Rabbi Yehuda, and she brings it to Rabbi Yitzchak, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, B'dachile, and he deems her ritually pure. Heichi Abid Hachi, how is that possible? How does he do this? Isn't it true that we have that principle that if one rabbi makes a psak, another rabbi isn't allowed to give a different psak to his colleague? Amrinan, we say that initially Rabbi Yitzchak Tamuye Hava Mitamile, initially he deemed her impure. Kevan de Amrale de Chol Yoma Michte La. So we initially say that Rabbi Yitzchak, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, deemed her impure. He initially agreed with the first psak. He wasn't going against this principle that you can't give a different psak. But then Yalta was able to explain that she's brought this blood to him many times before, and he deemed it ritually pure. And because of the other part of the Gemara, that we see that women are trustworthy in this area, her claim is credible, and therefore Rabbi Yitzchak bar Rabbi Yehuda changes, and he says that it is ritually pure. So this is our kind of third stroke or third color of Yalta. We see here again, she is somewhat challenging the rabbinic authority around her. Not, I would say, not drastically. This isn't like this is a conversation. She's not going off and breaking anything. She is pushing though. How is this Gemara sitting with people? Do we see any change, any growth? Why would she be, why is she so much calmer here when discussing something she thinks is right than she was before? Does anyone have any thoughts about this?
She feels very entitled.
She feels very entitled.
Yeah, she deserves to be carried. She deserves the right answer from the Rabbanim. She deserves to get that cup of wine. And if she doesn't get what she wants, she's gonna fight for it, get it.
Interesting. Do you see? So I definitely hear that in the first two. Do you think this Gemara is any different because it could have impacts on other people?
Is there an implication here that anyone else knew about it?
I don't know if you mean like if anyone else knew about her psak? I
Yeah.
mean like if she's pushing them to say, you always say that this is tahor and now you're making a mistake because you have some sort of problem, pain, infection in your eye, that could have implications for other women going to that same rabbi, and therefore maybe she's pushing because of that. Or do you think she's pushing for her own psak there?
Yeah, when in the text she appears to be pushing for her own benefit. Yeah.
Well, it doesn't say one way or other.
No.
Yeah, it doesn't say one way or other, but I'm curious to know what you think. If it's
Is
for her, if it's for
is it surprising in a way that she actually goes to ask the question when she seems so sure of the answer?
Okay, excellent question. Why is she asking the question if she's saying she knows the answer? This is something that I think is really to Yalta's credit, and also I think a little bit describes her role in the community. Yalta she is someone who is an advice. We might call her a yoetzet, someone who gives advice. But she definitely, first of all, you're not supposed to give psak for yourself. That's like kind of the overall thing. But also, it does seem like Yalta still works within the system. Whether she's educated or entitled, there is a system in place of how halacha is decided, and she does not step outside of that. She might make a lot of noise when something doesn't sit well with her, and she might push, and she might act out, but at the end of the day, she still is operating within the system. But I agree. If she knows the answer, why is she asking? She's asking because I think she knows that she's not entitled to be making these decisions on her own.
She's not subject to the establishment. She is the establishment.
She's part of a hierarchy.
She is the establishment.
She is the establishment.
So she's bending the rules to fit around her. She's not going to go outside of the rules because she is the rules, because she's part of the ruling family.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that is it's kind of reminding me of Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In, how like people often very often give real criticism to women who are in positions of power for saying, we need to make this change, but like not all women have that privilege to do it. Yalta is very upset about certain things, but she also she also might not realize her privilege in this. Like she gets to ask certain questions and she gets to be part of certain conversations because of her privilege. And I guess the hope would be just like with the, in Lean In with the pregnancy parking that they talk about here also, because Yalta is able to use her position of power and her position of privilege to kind of help herself. I would hope that the hope is it ends up ultimately benefiting other people as well. Yeah, Ruth.
I don't quite see it in that way, funnily enough, because we read that she's been before several times and she knew what the answer would be. And therefore, all she's doing on this occasion is what she's done before and following halacha.
Interesting. But why? So
why should she not have gone on this occasion when she always went before with the same stain?
Yeah, no, that is definitely true. It seems has always worked within the system, and here she's not really acting any differently, though I think this is maybe this is a time where she's seeing that the system is supposed to work in a certain way, and if it's not working in the way, if it's not the same well-oiled machine that it always has been, maybe something needs to be taken into account because it's not running the way it's supposed to be, and she points that out. Okay, we're going to jump to the last source, just I want to be conscious of time. You know what? I'm actually going to summarize the last source because it's quite long. Okay, so our last source, we are in Masechet Chulin, talking about kashrut, Masechet Chulin. Okay, Yalta is sitting at the table with her husband, Rabbi Nachman, and she says to him, Kol da'asar lan rachmana, shar lan kebate. Everything that the Torah makes asur for us, everything that's prohibited, there is a parallel that is permitted. And then she goes on to give some examples. For example, we're prohibited from eating blood, but we're permitted to eat liver, which has a similar taste. We are prohibited to eat the fat of domesticated animals, but we are permitted to eat the fat of undomesticated. We can't eat giruta, which is a non-kosher fish, but we can't eat the tongue of a fish, which tastes similar. So she is, she's bringing all of these examples. And then they get into an interesting halachic discussion because she says that it's prohibited to eat meat cooked in milk, but she says, I want to eat a dish that tastes like it. Meaning if it's asur, there has to be a parallel that's mutar. And they get into this whole halachic debate about, is there something that tastes like it? Rabbi Nachman says to his cook, roasted udders on a spit are what you should go prepare for her, because obviously the udder itself is the flesh, there's milk inside, go roast it. And he didn't tell them to tear the udders to drain it. And then the Gemara asks, like, is that okay? The requirement is only talking about cooking, not roasting. Anyway, they get into this whole interesting halachic debate. And I wanted to end with this because I think this, to me, is a very well-rounded and kind of zoomed out perspective on Yalta. Here is this woman who is sitting at the table with her husband, who's an influential rabbi, and she's having a halachic discussion. She's having a respectful halachic discussion where it seems like she has some sort of nuanced, maybe innovative thought about what the Torah permits and prohibits. And she's having this conversation, and then they get into an actual halachic discussion. Well, what is the parallel to this thing that tastes like meat and milk together? What do we have to drain an udder? Can it be roasted? Can it be cooked in a pot? And we see that there is a very, very respectful conversation taking place here. So what I want to like share a few kind of thoughts about this with you, and then hear your reflections. So again, like I said in the beginning, we don't often get a full picture of who a woman is from the text. It's true of men too, but certainly of women, since there are far fewer women in text, definitely in the Gemara. We get snippets of her in action. We get maybe some thoughts that she has. And these are the moments where we're meant to learn from her. So these stories of Yalta that I brought, these are really all we have of her. And this is how we are supposed to learn about her and from her. She's smart. Yalta is clearly a smart woman. She's sought out by the community for her advice. It seems like not her psak because she turns to a rabbi, but we don't know what advice people want from her. It might not be halachic at all. Maybe she was great at dealing with family issues. I don't know what it was, but she clearly was sought after for advice. And she pushes back. She demands respect. She pushes back when she doesn't feel like she gets the respect she deserves. And we see she maybe it's her ego. Maybe it is a broader kind of feminist lesson she is teaching, that she doesn't want women to be talked about in a certain way. I think the idea of being talked about in a room like you're not in the room is something that probably everyone can understand is a very frustrating thing. And Yalta does not just sit there and let it happen. She takes control. She is very highly capable of having thoughtful and meaningful conversation with the rabbis around her. And also she is clearly knowledgeable in halacha, which we see from the Nida Gemara, that she, not just through her own experience, but she knows kind of how to work the system and talk to people about halacha. So the proper outcome is actually what gets carried out. And I think maybe most interestingly about her, she's navigating this completely new world. It doesn't really seem like she has any peers. We don't hear that she has a sister of a similar status. We don't hear about her mother. We don't hear about other women in the community who are doing this. She seems to really be operating at this alone, which I think makes her very interesting. And it also makes her a lot more human. There are some examples where she does a really great job at communicating, at talking to the rabbis in a way that they need to hear in order for the best psak to be carried out, whether it's for her or whether it's for kind of a greater good. That is certainly something that is up for debate. And at the same time, she did all of these things. And I think it really comes from this place of her having grown up in this incredibly privileged situation where her father was a massively influential figure. She ended up marrying a man who not only was an influential figure, but he clearly was very happy in her involvement. He was the one who wanted to pass her the coast. He seems to know who he married. He seems to respect who he married. And they kind of create this house where not only does he respect her, but I love the idea that at the end of the day, they're sitting down to dinner and they're having a discussion about halacha. That is kind of how I like to see Yalta. I think, this vision I have of her and Rabbi Nachman sitting at the table, where she's giving this insight into halacha and what is permitted and what is prohibited, and then trying to work through something together. I think that that's a really beautiful model, and I think it takes a lot of steps, maybe some missteps, but it takes a lot of experience for her to get there, and she isn't getting there alone. She has a supportive husband, she has a supportive community who clearly seek out her insight. She has her own education, and I don't know, I think she's really special. She's really unique. We have a few stories about her, which again is pretty rare. We see with a lot of women in Tanakh, we don't have that many stories about them, maybe 2, 3. We have quite a few stories about her. And just a final thought, I used to read the story about the wine cask, and this is like a classic example of like where you are in your life, text hits you differently. But when I first learned this, I learned the Gemara about her breaking the casks as being something completely inappropriate, right? Like, yes, it's childish. Why would you go break it? Why not just have a conversation? And then I was thinking, I was kind of just reflecting on it in a bigger sense. And I was thinking about the Gemara where God says to Moshe about the luchot, about the tablets, Yasher kolach sheshibarta, like good for you for breaking them. Sometimes you need to break it. And it made me kind of just wonder if we judge Yalta in an unfair light, and that maybe there is some benefit to her proving her point in that way. Benedict, maybe she was proving a larger point about women. Maybe she was proving just a kind of a larger point about don't talk about me that way. I wish we had the end of the story. Just like with Moshe and the Luchot, we know what happens. We know they get a new set. We know more about his leadership. We don't get that with Yalta. And so I guess we have to work with what we have in the story here, but I wanted to end with kind of this like broader reflection. Who is Yalta? She's complicated. She's passionate. She's educated. She certainly leans into the halachic community. She is a voice. She is active, and at the same time, she is a woman who sits at the table with her husband, having a really meaningful and insightful halachic discussion. And I think that's really who she is, and that's where she comes from when she kind of takes her actions outside of the house as well. So I want to open it up now, just see if anyone has any final reflections on Yalta, on the sources, on her stories. No reflections. Benedict, what do you think about her after all of this?
To have a wonderful relationship with Rav Nachman. And And that's really, anyway, that's something very special. I recall a different situation where I think she gets him out of trouble. And my Leah Rosenthal, who's another of my teachers, used to say that Yalta was smarter than Rav Nachman. And I think that's it's a wonder. Anyway, it's just wonderful to see this relationship portrayed in the Talmud.
I agree. I think it's Rav Soloveitchik talks about Avraham and Sarah as kind of this paradigm of a couple. And to me, I always think of this as like the paradigm of a couple where they're both passionate, they're both very involved, and they're able to go out, and he acts in the way he wants to act, and he has his role, she has her role, but at the end of the day, they sit down at the same table and they have a very respectful and thoughtful discussion together.
Ramie, why don't you switch the screen share off now, perhaps just to end? Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sure you will agree that this has been a really fascinating and most enjoyable presentation. Ramie, thank you very much. I can speak to you directly. It's really greatly appreciated. And I'm so pleased that you've agreed to give 2 more sessions. Here's the advert. The next one is on the 15th of December, and the title will be on Parshat Miketz, O Brother, Who Art Thou? I have no further information. This is the title that Ramie sent me this afternoon. I'd like, so please put that in your diary. I think that's during Hanukkah. Is that what my imagination? So thank you very much for joining us. It's taken a while to get to this point, but I'm really delighted that we've been able to include your education program, and your the quality of the presentation, the explanation, reading the text has more than paid off, and I'm extremely delighted to have hosted you. I'm just thinking about one thing you said towards the end, which is about someone who knows how to speak to rabbis to hear what they need to hear. I think that's probably all that is necessary to say, Ramie. But thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to the audience who are not just in London. There are various Ramie fans from other places around the world as well. Please do join us next time. We'll distribute the link, and thank you very much to all, and particularly to Ramie for a most interesting evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shkoyach.
Shkoyach.